We're live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. We're also live on our Digimentors website. Thank you for Andrea. Thank you to Andrea for letting us go live on her Facebook and Twitter accounts as well. Welcome to another edition of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along. My name is Neil Parekh. I am the executive producer of the show, and we have such a great show planned for today. Andrea Elliott is a Pulitzer Prize winning investigative reporter for the New York Times and author of Invisible Child: Poverty, Survival, and Hope in an American City. Thank you so much for joining us. Please make sure to like, share, retweet, and comment to let us know what questions you have. We also want to know where you're watching from. Remember, as soon as the show is over, it'll play back right on the same links where you're watching now. First, we want to give you a little promo, a little teaser of what to expect in today's show.
In your imagination, what?
This week on Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along, Andrea Elliott. Andrea is a Pulitzer Prize winning investigative reporter for the New York Times who has documented the lives of poor Americans, Muslim immigrants, and other people on the margins of power. She's the author of Invisible Child: Poverty, Survival, and Hope in an American City. Invisible Child follows 8 dramatic years in the life of Dasani Coates, tracing the passage of Dasani's ancestors from slavery to the Great Migration North. Andrea's reporting on Dasani, which led to the book, won a 2014 George Polk Award and was a New York Times Magazine cover story. In 2007, her series An Imam in America was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for feature writing. Andrea is a 1999 graduate of the Columbia Journalism School. We will also cover the latest on the Russian invasion of Ukraine and discuss ways you can help. Every week, we review the print edition of the Sunday New York Times, taking audience questions and interviewing special guests. The show is produced by Digimentors. We produce high-quality virtual and hybrid events for organizations big and small around the world. We also do social and digital consulting, training, and workshops. Sri Srinivasan is our host. I'm the executive producer of the show, Neil Parekh. Our production team includes Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor, Julia Weeks, and Carla Baranakis. Again, Andrea Elliott is our guest, live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and our Digimentors website. Thank you very much. That's a little taste of what we're going to be seeing in today's show. Again, we are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Please like, please comment, please share, please tag a friend and let them know that you're watching. We want to bring on Sri Srinivasan and welcome our guests. Sri, hello. How are you?
Good morning, Neil. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody all around the world. We're so glad you're here with us today. If you're watching live, tag a friend, hit share. If you have a chance to watch this later, you're watching the recording, please continue to share it and tag friends. We do this every Sunday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. We've been doing it for more than 6 years, reading the print edition of the Sunday New York Times out loud. Why? Because we really care about accurate information, news, and about newspapers. And this isn't just about the New York Times. We have done various episodes around other newspapers, the Washington Post, the Chicago Sun-Times, the Toronto Globe and Mail, Khaleej Times out in Dubai. So we will continue to reach out across the country, around the world in this way. Please tell us where you are this Sunday. What are you looking forward to? What are the news items you want to hear about? And of course, we'll talk a lot about the Ukraine. I have just finished writing my newsletter about the Ukraine that just came out. Today's edition is How You Can Help, and it's on Substack, srinet.substack.com. Please take a look. If it's in your inbox, please do read it and share. And if you're not subscribed, you can sign up, srinet.substack.com. There you go. And Neil, I took this picture last night walking my dog Tara late night with my friend Saswato, and that's the Broadway Presbyterian Church right near Columbia. I know Andrea would remember this church, and it's lit up like a lot of places around the world that have lit up for Ukraine. And we want to thank our sponsors, Muckrack. Everyone who's a journalist should be verified on Muckrack. It's a free service, the largest directory of journalists in the world. And if you're in PR or comms, you know Muckrack and the services they offer for folks in your industry. And if you'd like to be a sponsor, please check out how you can sign up by emailing me, sri@digimentors.group, or Neil@digimentors.group. We want to thank our incredible team that puts this together every week. You've seen Neil, our executive producer, @Neil Parekh. Paula Kiger is @Big Green Pen, Steve Taylor @Steve Derive, Julia Weeks @Julia L. Weeks, and Carla Baranakis @Kabara. You will see that this show is very different from the average Zoom webinar that you see. We try to make this as engaging as possible, and we'll show you how we do it by taking your comments. So we have people saying hello from various places. Let's bring their comments in and give you a chance to see how this works. And we want to especially welcome the folks who are watching on Andrea's Twitter and Andrea's Facebook. This might be the first time you're joining us. Hearty welcome to you. So let's see who is joining us. I see various folks are coming in. So here is Cherie watching from Beverly Hills. That's 5:30 in the morning there. So thank you for being here. I see Ken is watching from Iowa. Welcome, Ken. We see Miriam's watching from Hell's Kitchen in New York City. Welcome. And Sudha, that's Neil's mom, is watching from Tampa. Hi, Sudha. And Neil gets to say
Hi,
hello
Mom.
to you.
How are you doing?
And a former guest who was here for Mother's Day 2 years ago, Neil, Pradnya is here from Silver Spring, and it's raining there. Therese is watching from Yonkers. Jonathan's watching from the East Village. Jonathan's a loyal viewer. Thank you very much. All these folks watching. Stefan, part of our Digimentors team, sending light and love out into the air this and every morning to all, thinking of all in Ukraine and who have fled their homeland. Standing with Ukraine is Stefan at Spin It Social. Lots of folks here. My friend Apollo is watching. Good morning from Philadelphia. Hope all is well. And Macron is watching as well, and he's talking about places where you can, restaurants you can go and support. And Naomi says, a dreary Upper West Side morning. Good morning in Ukrainian. And I, of course, cannot read that, though some people may not know that I went to Detsky Sad, or kindergarten, in Moscow as a little kid. And I used to speak fluent Russian, and I can't anymore. And I could probably have read that even if I didn't speak Ukrainian. Ellen is watching from New York City. Thank you so much. Linda from Long Island, looks like rain coming. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you for being part of the show. I am super excited about Andrea joining us. I've known her since the fall of 1998, because that's when she came to Columbia Journalism School, and her book has had such a huge impact around the country and in policy circles, and just people loved reading it. Let's give you some of the first, let's look at this. Andrea was with her RW1 class at Columbia J School. That's Professor Sig Gisler, legendary professor, with adjunct Carla Baranakis for their basic reporting and writing class. At the beginning of the class, they toured the Bronx, and this photo was taken on that tour. And we'll ask Andrea what it was like to go from that moment to where she has in terms of storytelling, reporting, being an investigative journalist. Let's also take a look at the praise the book has gotten from so many parts of the book review industry and more. The book is called Invisible Child: Poverty, Survival, and Hope in an American City, a classic to rank with Orwell. That's incredible, from the Sunday Times. Tenacious, unflinching reporting, a rare and powerful work whose stories will live inside you long after you read them. Indelible, virtuosic, a remarkable feat of extended reportage, says the Financial Times, and a landmark account of American poverty and class immobility. We talk so much about mobility and class mobility in America. This is about immobility. Let's go on to see some more of the lists that this book was on. 10 best books of 2021, Obama's favorite books of 2022. That's from President Obama. 5 best books of 2021, The Atlantic. #1 best nonfiction book, Amazon editors. Finalist for the Penn Literary Award. Just so many amazing things. And a paperback is coming out in June, and everyone will want to make sure you grab either the hardcover or the paperback. And please, you can go on to any of your favorite book sites, including, of course, any independent sites you like, and get Invisible Child. And the paperback comes out in June. So I am excited now to present to you the front pages of the New York Times. We're going to take a look at various parts, and then we will bring Andrea on in just a minute. So first thing I'm going to do is just show you here the front page, Taking Nuclear Site, Russia Marches On. That was Saturday's headline. And today's headline is Attacks, Halt Evacuation, Putin Issues Threat. So watch as we will read this story and talk more about it with Andrea. What else is in the paper today? The Sunday Review cover is Where the Party Never Ends. The Disney for Aging Boomers puts hedonism on full display. Okay, I look forward to seeing that. Sunday Styles is The Rise of Bigorexia. Social media fuels boys who see chiseled bodies with obsessive workouts and diets. We hear so much about how social media affects girls' body image. I want to see this story. The Sunday Business cover is No Prying, No Belly Pats, Just Work. The sweet relief of being pregnant on Zoom and not at the office, when, of course, men and women will comment on your pregnancy in many ways. And here is the Arts and Leisure cover is Small Steps, Big Victories, Recovering from a Stroke. The dancer and choreographer Ronald K. Brown is learning new ways to do his work. Metropolitan cover is Brooklyn's Small Town by the Sea. Red Hook seems to be every New Yorker's favorite neighborhood, at least for an afternoon. And look at this, the real estate cover, More Agents, Fewer Homes. New brokers inspired during the pandemic are chasing a record low number of listings. And the memoir issue is the cover of the New York Times Book Review, where they've got Amy Bloom, Frank Bruni, and so many others here as well. And by the way, Frank is a fellow alum of Columbia Journalism School, where both I and Andrea studied. And 2 more sections to show you in the paper today. This is the cover of the Times Magazine. Andrea had the cover a few months ago, and this is The Turning Tide in Greece and across Europe. Attitudes towards immigrants have hardened, and migrants have hardened to the point that their helpers have become political targets. Of course, suddenly we see a lot of interest in having Ukrainian refugees come in, not just across Europe, but also in America. And the Times T magazine, the style magazine, colorful, shimmering fashion that makes no apologies. Men's Fashion Spotlight. In doing these episodes now for 6 years, we've almost never read the T section. So one day, Neil, we should put together an episode just where we talk about that or get a chance to read it and talk about it. So now let's bring on our guest, and we'll revisit the paper in just a minute. Neil says, glad so many people are watching. I'm particularly excited for today's show. Thanks, Neil. And let's bring on our card to show people who our guest is, and then we will bring her on the air with us. Our guest is Pulitzer Prize winning investigative reporter for the New York Times and former staff writer at the Miami Herald, author of Invisible Child, Poverty, Survival, and Hope in an American City. Andrea Elliott is at Andrea F. Elliott. Please follow her. We're live on her Twitter, on her Facebook, on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, as well as Facebook for my accounts as well. Thank you all for being here. And there she is.
Hi, Sri.
How are you?
Oh, I'm really happy to be on this show with you. It's such an honor. And as you were talking about 1998, a lot of memories came flooding back of that very formative year. And I just remember so well, the internet hadn't really happened yet. It was just happening. It was starting to happen. And you were the tech absolute guru of this, of a pioneer in a sense of this whole new terrain that journalists would eventually learn, right, to master. But that's how I remember you most, is just kind of trying to get us to lean into it, into the technology. And here we are.
Thank you. That's very kind. And as you know, not everyone believed that the internet was going to stay. And we did talk, even as we were focusing on the technology, that it's still about the reporting, it's about the writing, and that's what's going to make you successful as a journalist. If we can put that card back up, I want to show everybody that Andrea hasn't changed in all of these years, almost 25 years.
Oh, that's not true.
If you look at that photograph, but I do, there she is. Look at that. She looks the same. And
well, the funny thing about that is I look at that photograph of me, and I think that is the happy being of a young person who is yet to be unscathed, or is still unscathed by life. Just so beaming and full. And here I am many years later, and but I hope I have that spirit in me still.
That's how I remember you, Andrea, and you do have that spirit. I do bring greetings from Professor Gisler, who sent us those pictures, and I talked to him yesterday. He is so excited about all your success. As you know, he has been there from the beginning, at least your Columbia career. And
he's my all-time mentor, and he and Carla Baranakis, and that RW1 class was just made me the journalist I think that I became. It planted all the right seeds. So I'm just so grateful.
And there's Carla saying good morning, and I'm so honored to work with her every day at Digimentors, our company with Neil and others. And she has had such an influence on so many people. So greetings, Carla, and thank you for yet another awesome guest. And for everybody watching for the first time, this is the Sunday New York Times Read Along, where we read the Sunday newspaper for 6 years. And it's almost always the New York Times, but not always the New York Times. And we'd love to do more newspapers around the country. And Andrea is going to talk about the paper with me, talk about her book, and also give you some sense of what it's like to work at the New York Times over these many, many years, and also what are some of the things she's working on. So let me just start by asking you what my first question, which I usually ask, is how has the pandemic treated you, and how are you doing?
Thank you. That's a very kind question. I feel very lucky to have been spared the problems that so many Americans have had to shoulder with the pandemic. I have not. I've had shelter, and I've been able to be at home with my kids, and so and worked throughout it. So I feel very lucky.
Yeah, I just looking at behind you at the books on your shelf. Of course, we see Invisible Child. Tell us what else is on the shelf there, because I see Ayad Akhtar's book, my friend, who is the amazing playwright and writer, and there he is.
I mean, these are some of my favorite books, actually. So, James Baldwin, The Fire Next Time, absolute classic, such an important book. Just Kids, Patti Smith, one of the great narratives of New York City. This is Code of the Street, which not a lot of people know unless you are an academic or you work in poverty stuff. But Elijah Anderson, it's just brilliant. And it's basically kind of an ethnography of life in urban America and the language around it and attitudes. This is a memoir by my friend, Leona Godin. It's Their Plant Eyes, A Personal and Cultural History of Blindness. It's so brilliant. Battle for Bed-Stuy, which is just a great book about the history of Bed-Stuy, which I looked at. Some of these are just books that were very important to my book, to the sort of, study of the subjects that then I wound up writing about. I had, as you mentioned, and then There Are No Children Here, which really influenced me. Alex Kotlowitz's classic book from the 80s about two brothers in the Chicago projects. And of course, Matt Desmond's Evicted. These are some of my favorite books. So yes.
Folks, you are catching also, as she puts her nicely curated shelf back together, you're seeing her generosity of spirit here as well, giving credit to all the folks who influenced her, some of them already. And then I have to ask, before we get into it, the piece of art behind you.
Okay, well, I have to be transparent about this. So because we've had to, is in the pandemic, be very flexible, malleable, learn new things, journalists have had to become sound techs. We've had to figure out technology in a way that I am not comfortable with, but I've managed. And one of those things is I needed to find a space that was soundproof in order to be able to go on virtual book tour. And so I am actually in my children's closet. And so it doesn't look like that. I'm just telling you what the truth is. So this is one of my favorite pieces of artwork, and these are my books. But the truth is that if I point the camera in this direction, you will see. And the person who told me to do this was Pamela Paul, who's the, of course, editor of Book Review. She had me on her podcast. She said, go into a closet. It's the best soundproofing you'll ever get. And so here I am. And my children are so tired of walking into a sound studio in order to pick their outfits for the day, but so goes it.
And they have to make sure the cameras are off when they're going in the closet, obviously.
There are no cameras when that happens, but yes.
And Pradnya says, off to the bookstore I go, because she heard about all the titles that you were recommending, and of course your own book. And Ken is going to the bookstore too. And Paula has put in a link to The Invisible Child, and you can go to Andrea-Elliott.com and check her out also on Twitter at Andrea F. Elliott. And you can find her there. So lots of great comments coming in, folks. Tell us where you're watching from and tell us about your Sunday. And I want to hear about the book, the journey of the book, and then we'll get to the paper.
Okay, so let's talk about the journey. We have some photographs that I think will help give you a visual. So it all began when I was at the Times. This is a photograph of Dasani when I met her, taken by the great photographer Ruth Fremson in the winter of 2012. So I had known Dasani then for a few months. I had met her and her family. The next photograph will show them standing outside their homeless shelter in Fort Greene, Brooklyn. I was just looking for a way into what was a really big story, which was both the story of the homeless crisis in New York City, where more than 22,000 children were living in shelters, and also the story of child poverty in America. We had and continue to have one of the highest child poverty rates in the developed world, 1 in 5 children. And that statistic just really stunned me. And I've always been a reporter who has leaned into the human narrative and trying to figure out how to put a face on numbers. And beyond the face, really getting inside the human story. And I thought that the best way to do that in this case was to find one kid. And she's standing right there in the middle in one of her favorite T-shirts that she loved to wear, surrounded by her 7 siblings. And her stepfather is there on the left. And then her mother, Chanel, is standing next to her. And this is a kid who just, everything that came out of her mouth, I wanted to write down as soon as we met. In the next photograph, you're going to see a photograph of her with her closest sibling, Aviana. So both Dasani and Aviana were named after bottled waters. And it's interesting. So of course, Evian, but Dasani, her mother chose that name because she saw it, that it had just come out the year that before Dasani was born in 2000. And it was on the shelf of her bodega in a yet to be gentrified part of Brooklyn, Bed-Stuy. And Chanel just loved the sound of it, much the way that her own mother loved the sound of the name Chanel, which she had spotted in a magazine in a glossy ad for the fancy perfume, because back then in the 70s in East Brooklyn, that was the closest you could get to this other world. But now Chanel was holding in 2000 this bottle in her hand that she would name her child after. And so I think that that's a really interesting kind of, to me, that signaled that there was a real arc to this story, that the city was changing between these two generations in such a way that Dasani's experience of poverty would be very different from her mother's. In the next photograph, we have their room in the Auburn shelter in Fort Greene. They lived, all of them, all 10 members of this family, in a crammed room that had mice and mold and things stacked everywhere. And it was just a very chaotic way to live. Dasani would go to her window every morning and look out at the Empire State Building. And she was just a dreamer. She had major aspirations, but she also had these just incredible burdens. In this next photograph, you're going to see her and her siblings. She's taking them to school because there was a school bus strike at that time. And so she had no choice but to get her little siblings to school because her parents were overwhelmed. There were so many of them. Her mother would often stay with the baby. And then Dasani, by the time she got to school, you'll see in the next photograph, she often had missed the free breakfast and was tired. And, it's always important for me to emphasize, also as a mother, I have two daughters who were very, very young when this began, that by the time a lot of kids are waking up in New York City just to go to school, Dasani had been working for a few hours. She'd been working as a sort of third parent, and really, so she just shouldered so much, and yet she was on the honor roll. Somehow she just persevered to the point where she was, just able to show her abilities in such an impressive way. In the next photograph, you're going to see her and her siblings walking down the hall of their true second home, which was the McKinney School nearby. And that became the refuge for Ruth Fremson and me as we reported this story undercover for a year. The school was on board and allowed us access that made it possible for me to interview Dasani. There's a video, I don't know, Neil, if you want to show it, of one of those interviews that kind of shows Dasani speaking in her own voice. But we can do that later. In the next photograph, you'll see of Dasani and me and Aviana. This is a more recent, this is probably around 2016. So I had been in their lives street reporting for years at that point. But I don't know, do you want to show the video, Neil?
Yeah, let's go ahead and play the video. I think it's important. It's about a minute long, but it gives Dasani a voice, which I think is so important.
It was probably our fifth interview, and it was these would take place in the lunch hour once a week at the school. Yeah. And
yeah, let's go ahead and we'll just watch it, and then we'll come back after the video.
In your imagination, what does the perfect childhood look like?
Quiet, flowers everywhere, sparkles on the ground. Mom and Dad always jumped up. A perfect childhood. Yeah, Mom and Dad can be drunk at a perfect childhood. Or they be nice. They give you whatever you want. They give you money, everything you ask for. Your room is always decorated nice. You always have good blingage. Your clothes will be nice. That's a perfect childhood.
Did you say drugged up?
Jumped.
Junked?
Drunk.
Drunk.
Some parents, they have perfect childhoods, but sometimes they get carried away. Like they be frustrated sometimes, and then they get drunk.
So you think that being drunk is a part of the perfect childhood? The parents are drunk?
Yes, because when they're drunk, you ask for anything, they tell you can get it. That's a perfect childhood.
Really, Dasani, you really think a perfect childhood is your parents?
You said use my imagination.
Okay.
I used it.
I mean, that just gives you a sense of our dynamic. And she was, even at age 11, so eager to push back, to challenge me. It was always a two-way street, which is, I think, what happens in deep reporting is it is a two-way street. These are conversations more than interviews, although they are, of course, interviews, but they feel often like a conversation.
And what a shocking thing to say, but it just tells you how she was thinking. So parents who are drunk give you whatever you want, meaning she would have control for a change rather than being subject to it. But I was also struck by quiet. She said things would be quiet because I imagine in a home like that, things weren't quiet.
Dasani talks so much about quiet and wanting quiet and the interruption, the constant. I mean, this is the thing about poverty is people have this view from far away who have never been poor that poverty is about, extreme suffering, which it can be, of course, food insecurity, being hungry, maybe greater exposure to toxic situations such as violence, the stress that comes with poverty, housing insecurity. But it's also these things that you never consider until you're inside this world. Something as simple as noise all the time, which interrupts sleep, which then makes it really hard to be your best self during the day. I mean, that's a very constant threat to Dasani's well-being, was just the sheer amount of noise.
Let's continue the journey.
Yes. Okay. Well, the next part, I thought we could talk about my process. That's a typical photograph of my my desk. So the series ran in 2013, and I continued to follow them for the next 8 years to write a book. In the back, you'll see some files. This was just a huge undertaking, and I had been accustomed to working in a really methodical way, but I didn't know what I was heading into, and I allowed it to just be what it needed to be, which was years and years and years of research mixed with real-time reporting. So I ended up getting more than 14,000 records from various city agencies, things like school report cards, dental records, and also tons of audio, 132 hours of audio and 28 hours of video. And all this stuff had to be organized in such a way that I could figure out how to translate it for the reader into a narrative. So the most important thing I did was, this next photograph will show you, is this thing called a timeline, which my wonderful colleague at the Times, Ben Weiser, taught me to do very early on in the Bronx when we were reporting together on prosecutorial misconduct. He said to me, and this was back in 2004, that his major pro tip, and this is mine for anyone, is whatever story it is, however small or big, you keep a timeline. You just start plugging in events as you go, historical, real time. My timeline I had it up in the New York Times actually during the series. It looked a lot like that. It was color coded. So for different people, different characters or sort of subject matters were in different colors. And that people in the newsroom would joke that they started making jokes about Homeland, and I hadn't watched Homeland. So I thought it was just like the ultimate compliment that I was being compared to Carrie in Homeland, until I actually then sat down and watched it and saw that what they were comparing me to was the scene of Carrie mapping out in the middle of some epic manic episode that she was experiencing in a mental health crisis, mapping out and figuring out terrorist networks. Anyway, so, okay, it's an intense process, but the timeline really was extremely helpful. And then also next picture you'll see, and the timeline followed me. Like, this is where I was born in Virginia. And so I put it up there for a little while, and I had a storyboard, that was also really important because I'm a very visual person. I needed to see photographs and see certain quotes. And I brought some of them actually with me, so I could show you guys. I can show you an essay that Chanel wrote for me about how she became blood. This was very important chapters in the book about Chanel's early history in her teens and early 20s when she was in a gang. And I just had that up. And sometimes I would have certain quotes. There were these remarkable quotes. They call it a hearing. This is something Chanel said, and I would often glance at it. So you hear what they got to say, and that's that. That's how she saw the family court system. And then, photographs. This is a photograph of Chanel, me, and Dasani, and Hershey when Dasani went away to boarding school. These things just helped sometimes orient me. This is a rap that Chanel wrote. For some reason, I have all the Chanel stuff with me right now, but there was a bunch of Dasani things. And then I'd have these cards this was my favorite one. This is one that I had during the Imam series. And then I just keep going sometimes. And I would just put it up next to it gets really hard when you hit a wall when you're writing. And you just have to remember the job is to keep going. So, and then I guess if we go back to the pictures, the last one is of the files. after that. This is just an example of the thousands of records. So this is just the family court case that I wrote about in this book. And so it's the records that I got that were very, very hard to get, of the family's interaction with Child Protective Services. And each batch, what I would do is I would read through it once and just, I mean, this batch alone, and I took a picture of it just to remind myself later, took a month, because, there were 8 children involved, and I had to kind of track what was happening to each of them in this. Once they'd gone into foster care, it was very important to kind of be able to tell that story in a way that didn't overwhelm the reader, but that got the right points across. So I don't know how much time we have left, but I have some photographs of what's happening today. So the book follows.
Can we just pause for 1 second? I just
Yeah.
want everybody who is watching, who hasn't written a book, to understand how complicated it is. You have a sense how complicated books are, but this gives you a rare insight into the process that a writer does and follows. And then you can see not just the storyboards, but even the self-motivation that's required. There isn't a lot of glamour in book writing. You have to bear down and motivate yourself. Very often, my wife Rupa, who many of you know, at Rupa Online, has published a book and is working on a novel. And I just know how much the process makes a difference in her success. And we also learned this, Andrea, from watching our friends and classmates and colleagues who would attend Sam Friedman's book writing class seminar at Columbia. And again, it was all about the process. So folks, if you're just joining us, this is Andrea Elliott and I'm Sri Srinivasan. And we met in the fall of 1998 when she was a student at Columbia Journalism School. And now here she is, a very successful investigative reporter at the New York Times, a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, and the author of this incredible book you see behind her. It's called Invisible Child. And I want to ask you before, Ed, let's see all these great comments. I mean, that's something you put on a tombstone, the very first line, Andrea, when you saw that, a classic to rank with Orwell.
My jaw dropped.
Yeah, exactly.
I love the Brits. Everything is a literary reference. I want to just quickly say, because you mentioned Sam Friedman. Sam Friedman is my other great mentor. Very formative class. I took the book class that year, and he gave me, the roadmap, and was an incredible source of inspiration for years, and actually was an early reader of the book. And I think this book exists in large part because I learned these tools early on. Before I went to the Miami Herald as a total rookie, I already felt like I could do this bigger thing, which was narrative, because I tried it out at Columbia, and it was just such a gift.
Yeah, we're seeing lots of questions coming in, and we'll ask some of the questions in a moment. But if you can just finish up you have some pictures and some more of the process, and not the process, but this journey of this book and the story.
That's Dasani about 10 months ago. So one of the things Random House asked me to do is to have a portrait done of me, which I hadn't done in so long. And I went and did this fancy portrait. And then I thought, you know what? Dasani deserves the same thing. So my friend, who's a professional photographer, took this in my home. And I just love it. I think it's so stunning. It says so much about her. She graduated. She became the first in her family to graduate from high school and to enroll in college. She's at CUNY studying business administration at LaGuardia. And this next photograph we also did of her mother, Chanel, and Aviana. So everyone got a picture. And I just love that. I love it. And then I'm going to show you some of Ruth's latest photographs. So in the next photograph, you'll see Dasani with her sister. Do you see the next one? Yeah. And that's them. This was for the magazine story, which the cover I'll show you next, but that's her and her sister Aviana, who were separated in foster care. And actually they were always like twins. And then they experienced something very disturbing and upsetting, which happens often in the foster care system, which is that they couldn't see each other. They grew apart and they felt that their bond was breaking. And then they reunited and they've never been apart since. And after a long court battle, Dasani was also reunited with her mother and one of her other siblings. So they're all living together now in the Bronx in a Section 8 supported home. And I think that the family is kind of really on an upswing in that respect. In the next photograph, you'll see the cover, a shot that Ruth took of Dasani, which is such a stunning photograph. And I will close with a picture of my father, my late father, Robert Raymond Elliott, who passed away of 2 weeks before the book came out. And it was a devastating occurrence for me. He got to know Dasani quite well. He was an extraordinary person who devoted much of his life to fair housing and other issues. And so I just wanted to honor him by showing this picture. And also to honor Dasani, because Dasani had shown me for many years what it means to get through unexpected tragedy. And, you know, the loss of my father was that. And she was very, very, well, she cried actually. She was very upset when he died, as were her mother and sister, to the point where I was like, okay, he's my dad. I'm the one who needs to, you can't be wailing on the phone to me. But we laughed about that because she was so dramatic. But so much resilience there. And I'm so grateful. The journey for me personally is something I could talk about for hours, but I know we only have a few minutes. So maybe we could turn to questions.
Sure. Here's Apollo watching from Philly who says, deepest condolences, Andrea. May you be comforted and loved. And he also had a fun post before, said, yay, Dasani, so proud of you. Please keep going. And Apollo, thank you for watching and for sharing these comments. Everybody, please share your thoughts. We will read as many as we can on the air. And Andrea will be able to go back into her Facebook and take a look at those as well. And Patricia asked a question, how long do you follow your stories? And not always like this, right? We should also be clear. I want to say one thing before you answer that we, when we celebrate the New York Times, as we often do on this show, the Times has the business savvy and the business luck and everything else that it takes to be able to afford to give the reporters and writers like Andrea the space and time to do this kind of work. Not every journalist in the world has that time, or every organization has that time. So just to note that, and to understand that every news organization has its own pressures and things that it has to deal with, and not everybody can do what the New York Times does so often and what Andrea is able to do.
So I absolutely agree with that. It's an extraordinary privilege to work for a newspaper that can support long form narrative nonfiction. And I've always had this desire to do this kind of work ever since I landed at the Miami Herald on the night cops beat. And what I did then was because I didn't have kids, I was single, I was able to carve out huge swaths of time on my own time, so weekends, that I would devote to getting deeply inside another person's world. What I love to do as a reporter is get lost before I then find my way back to what the story is. I think that is our job. We don't go in knowing what the story is. We sort of have the rough parameters, and then we take the plunge with eyes wide open, ears wide open, to absorb what it is that the story is showing us, that the people we're following are showing us about their lives. And so I saw Dasani's life as just a series of guideposts, in a sense, that kept taking me in new directions. And so it was unusual for the Imam series and for the Dasani series. It was months. So just the Imam series was about 8 months. Dasani was a year. That's a huge amount of time to devote to reporting and writing. The book was another thing entirely. And I think what I would say about that process is just that, and thank you to, so many grants and foundations that helped support this book and make it possible, like New America and Whiting and Russell Sage, and I'm forgetting some others, CPRC, but these were extremely important to the survival of the book, to the book being able to become finally a book. I think that is the great challenge, is knowing sometimes when to step back out, pull away, and turn the reporting into writing. And I think what I kept running into with this book was just my own realization that I didn't know enough. I didn't know enough about the history of the welfare system. And so that was another foray of several months of research. But then I never regretted those extensions of time, because I think this book, her story, to my mind, really merited that. People often say, wow, this is an almost 600-page book. That's like the length of a presidential biography. And I say to that Dasani's life is worth every bit as much.
Thank
It's
you.
actually, and I don't say that just from a place of principle, but also just of story, of it's truly a fascinating story that cuts across history and time, and that really allows for delving into policy, into different chapters of New York City history, things like the Great Migration. This was a story that deserved that time and that kind of depth.
I see Naomi's question, but I'm going to ask you that and a couple of others that have come in. Can you talk a little bit about how you earned her trust, and what is it like to be someone of your background trying to tell this story? And did you ever feel uncomfortable about the maybe even privilege that you have to be able to tell the story?
Sure. I would say that we bring into our work as reporters our own humanity, our own experience, our own backgrounds, the way in which we were raised. There's no denying that, and there shouldn't be any denying that. And I think in the early days of this, I still had this more traditional view that I wear the reporter hat, and the person I'm reporting on, Dasani, is the subject. I ask the questions, she answers them. But I knew deep down that it was never as simple as that. It is a complicated process. Trust is a work in progress, I would say. It's never something that you arrive at as a final destination. It is something that you're constantly, tending to and being mindful of. That it's really what I wanted was for her to trust that I was there to write the story that needed to be written. Not that I was going to present her in a particular way, but that I was interested in, and she was a child when we began, so it was really more about my relationship with her parents then. By the time the book was finished, she was an adult. And I read the book to Dasani and her sister over the course of 5 days, slowly, because I didn't trust them to read it. Their parents read it, they're careful readers, but Dasani, just like my 13-year-old, is addicted to her phone. And I just thought, that it was important for me to also kind of absorb her reaction. It was hard. It was, but I felt like I owed it to her to read every sentence of this book out loud, and as part of the fact-checking process. I think that the trust is just complicated. I think my own role in terms of talking about privilege, this was front and center of my relationship with the family. I think of this book as a book about an encounter. It's New York City today is the constant encounter between rich and poor, between people of different races. It's not the siloed experience of poverty that was Chanel's mother's experience in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So gentrification has done that. And so me coming from this other world, even though to Chanel's mind, I wasn't all white, because she always said this, because I'm Latin. I am Latina. My mother is from Chile, and I grew up very rooted in that identity as well. And we were part of the exile community, my broader family. So I grew up, and I also lived in Chile, and I spoke Spanish words before I spoke English ones. And so for Chanel, that helped, because she liked that about me. She liked that there was something a little bit different there, and that I was also a mother was very important to her. She said she would never have let me near her children were I not a mother, which I understand. But there's no denying that I also came from this tremendous privilege. I had gone to college and gone to graduate school, worked for the New York Times. Those things were not things to avoid, but things to embrace in our conversations, because they showed me what it was like in our conversations about our differences. It gave me a window into how Chanel and Dasani saw this broader encounter. And I thought that was just, I accepted that as part of the process.
Thank you. so beautifully put. Sudha says, Andrea, there's not only writing a book, but you helped Dasani and her family. You helped her verbalize her feelings. And that, of course, for those who are just joining us, that's Neil's mother who's saying that to you. And I won't be able to read this whole thing, but this is Apollo, a note for Dasani from an emancipated foster child, him. Some in authority may not welcome her success, but see it as a critical function of a profile that's constructed to target her, as her success threatens many racist and classist presumptions. So keep looking out for her, especially in light of all this official oppression by law enforcement and abuse of authority and police brutality. Thank you, Apollo, for those words. We're going to talk a lot to Andrea, but we're also going to talk about the New York Times. And as a teaser, we're going to save a fabulous question from Carla, because one of the best things I ever heard at journalism school was from Sig Gisler, who said every reporter should have joyful entitlement. So we'll talk about what that means later in the show. So everyone stay tuned for that. And we are in the process of talking about, let's see here, Neil's showing us a portion of the proceeds of Invisible Child would go to helping Dasani's family. So talk about that a little bit, please.
Yes, that was very important to me. Well, we never spoke about it during the process of reporting, and even up until the last word was edited of this book, I didn't feel it was right to go into this with the family, because I always wanted them to be participating in this story from a position of power and agency, and not from the assumption that they would only be rewarded for their participation. However, I always knew that I would, of course, if there were proceeds, shared generously in them. And so after we wrapped up the book, I let them know that I would be donating a portion of the proceeds to this trust, Invisible Family Trust. And it's actually, Invisible Child Family Trust, which is on Twitter, but also on my website. So I would invite anyone who would like to contribute to Dasani's future education, as well as that of those of her siblings, to donate. Thank you.
So they can go to Andrea-Elliott.com and see that there and help out. And of course, if you just buy the book, if you go anywhere online or to your favorite bookstore and buy the book, you're also giving Andrea a chance to donate to the family. And I'm sure you had to clear this with the New York Times and all of that in terms of what are some guidelines about sharing things like that. So yeah, there is a part of the website. So Andrea, now we're going to switch gears and talk about the news. And we know it's a very busy news week, but we'll come back and talk a little bit more about some of the questions that people have. And Anusha, who is Director of Alumni Relations at Columbia Journalism School and a Columbia alum herself, says, so proud of you and your work, says Anusha. All right, so let's get to the paper. And I have the New York Times camera ready to go. And what we're going to do is share the front page and some of the sections. And as I'm reading the paper, I just want to hear your thoughts. And you'll know a lot of the players here, and you'll know also how some of the sausage is made, Andrea, so you can share your thoughts as we go through this. And folks, there's a rare opportunity to read in the middle of one of the busiest news weeks in recent years, the New York Times with a New York Times veteran. And the front page headline is Attacks Halt Evacuation, Putin Issues Threat. And this byline is Michael Schwartz, Anthony Kramer, and Michael Levinson. And let's see other Ukraine stories. Let's look at this. People cowering under this bridge. There's so many iconic photos. This is something that I'll never forget. I saw this online yesterday. For Art World, politics of war caused distress. After Zelensky's plea, the West raced to form a united front. These are stories by Mark Landler, Katrin Benold, and Martina Stevis-Gridneff. And Javier Hernandez wrote the art story. And soldiers and prisoners describe two sides of a battle near Kiev. A slow-moving Russian offensive is battered in ambushes. And then Ukraine's soul, and now its beating heart. Refugees in Lviv, and a memorial for soldiers killed since 2014. That's the thing that people don't always remember, that this has been going on for a long time. This didn't just happen last week. And then COVID drug is in demand. Well, let's just pause here. Your thoughts on overall the Ukraine coverage, and I know you have friends and colleagues all over there as well, Andrea, and then we'll go into the rest of the paper.
I mean, my thoughts are it's been breathtaking. And the photographs alone are so arresting, right? I mean, this photograph, I think, got me more than almost any other that I've seen. Just the sheer mass of humanity under this, this blown apart bridge.
Which could fall anytime on top of them, right? So they're
Just
in a time like this, you're looking for safety in maybe what's not a very safe place.
right. I've been just thinking a lot about my colleagues and their safety, and reading everything. It's hard to even actually have to talk about anything but this. It's hard, it's constant. It's always on my mind, and I think anyone who's a reporter is reading these stories with their colleagues in mind as well, right? And
Sure.
how they're doing it. Sabrina Tavernisi is a dear friend, and she's been doing these just remarkable dispatches on the daily from Ukraine, and I've texted with her a little bit, but we just, it's kind of, we're all on the edge of our seats.
Sure. My classmate from Columbia Journalism School, Sudarshan Raghavan of the Washington Post, is there, and it takes a special kind of person, as you know, Andrea, while the rest of us are safely here, to go into war zones and do that kind of coverage.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I hope Sabrina won't mind me sharing this, but I remember back in the days when she was in Iraq, we would get together every once in a while, and she'd say, "I think I don't have the fear gene." I'm missing the fear gene.
Right.
I have not done that kind of reporting. I've done some risky stuff. There was a piece I did in Morocco with Lindsay Adario that felt dangerous at times. Lindsay's also there now, taking some of this.
He's amazing, with a worldwide photographer for for various places.
Yeah.
She's worked everywhere in the world. It's amazing.
Yes, but it requires so much bravery and so much focus, and the ability to be able to churn out stories of this quality on deadline alone. That's hard, right? But then when you freight upon that the stress of war, it's hard to imagine.
Yep, for sure. And we'll see more of the Ukraine coverage inside, I'm sure. COVID drug is in demand, but doses go unused. And this is, we're seeing, Andrea, the lengthening of the pandemic. The stories out of the Ukraine are all partly based on the misinformation and disinformation that are affecting the world. Here, Putin is convinced some portion of his own people and his military that a democratically elected Jewish president who lost family members in the Holocaust is a Nazi. Like, how is that possible that would be done? And it unfortunately has. So that's what we're seeing here. The unraveling of a DA's case against Trump. There's so much going on that I didn't notice that this had happened. And I'm sorry to hear that, because Trump needs to pay for so many things. But this is certainly a story that I'll follow. And this is Ben Protas and William Rashbaum and Jonah Bromwich. And Ben was also a student at Columbia Journalism School.
And Willie Rashbaum, by the way, just a total legend. I just want to say, because he's done so much extraordinary work over the years.
And you know him as Willie. And here's inside the New York Times. It says, "My wife tracked me for journalism," and the reporter Kashmir Hill tracked the location of her husband Trevor Tim for her recent article. "I used Apple AirTags tiles and a GPS tracker to watch my husband's every move." That's, I think, the nightmare of most husbands. And here is a headline in history: Disney's philosophy. A magazine profile of Walt Disney, 1938, on this day, explored the movie mogul's creative process and how he developed definitive personalities in his cartoon characters. "Our work is a caricature of life," he said, rather than caricature of individuals. He said, "Our work is a caricature of life." That's a nice headline there. How to start working out. I've only recently started working out, so I want to make sure I'm on track for this. One of the things that have changed since your years in journalism school is how much more service journalism there is in journalism, right? In newspapers and things like that. Have you had to write any service type stories, or?
So I've been on leave from the Times for the book, and I'm still on book tour right now. So I haven't. I did do this cover story in the fall, but I should just say it's been a while since I've been in the newsroom, and I'm really looking forward to going back.
Yeah.
No, I have not done that. I'm looking at Zelensky's quote there, quote of the day, on the same page. Do you see it?
Yeah, sure. You can read it out loud. I've turned it. Yeah.
This is him commenting on the post-World War II security order, which he said was a poor match for the predations of leaders like Putin. They do not keep up with new threats. They are not effective for overcoming them. This is a cough syrup when you need a coronavirus vaccine. I also saw in the more live update, a quote by him that I wrote down, actually sort of looking on my phone, which is that he called Ukraine, I think this was today or maybe yesterday, a superpower of spirit.
Lovely. Yeah. And Kiev, the city of Kiev is now on Twitter at KYIV for the first time. And they call themselves City of Courage. You know, when cities all over the world name themselves, they're always looking for something that tourists will like. And now they have to change and be the City of Courage. All right, let's keep going here. This is a unity-minded utopia is divided over its future. This is about Oroville in southern India, which is a very, oh, there it is, Kiev, the City of Courage. And they're about, how many followers, Neil, do you see on the screen there? I can't quite see it, but they have lots of followers. I can see, 100,000. When I saw this, there were 700 followers. So 100,000 people have followed them, and they're followed by @Ukraine. So it's a nice connection there. Okay, let's keep going. After Zelensky's plea, more about the Ukraine. And I just can't stand by American veterans to try to join the fight, scrambling to answer Zelensky's call for help. And this is Hector, is just going to the airport to try to get there. What a risk Hector is taking. Ukrainians who signed to serve up at a military school in Lviv. Blinken pledges lasting support in border meeting. Allies focus on securing Kiev's line of succession. And Russia pounds civilian targets, cutting off evacuation. Look at this 2-page spread. This is the power of print, folks. This is why we do this show, to talk about print and to remind people that print still exists. And as the New York Times and others obviously go more digital, the team at the New York Times does amazing work in print and really important stuff. Please check this out. We've had the pleasure and honor of having our friend Tom Jolly on the show twice, and I hope we can coax him to come on again and talk about how the paper is put together. And you can find those in our archives on my YouTube channel, Srinet. Soldiers and prisoners describe two sides of the battle near Kiev. Lviv, the soul of the country, turns itself into a strategic hub. And this is a story that is going to be tied up in what's happening now, because Brittany Griner, who is a 7-time All-Star in the WNBA, she's also played in Russia, has been accused of having hashish oil, is detained in Russia, and you can be sure she'll be used as a pawn. David Rode, who I'm sure Andrea knows, is a former New York Times colleague who is now at the New Yorker, was on TV yesterday, and I tweeted about him saying that when he was kidnapped and held captive by the Taliban, he was, at that time, 80% of Americans abroad were held by terrorists and insurgent groups. Today, 80 to 90% are held by autocratic nations and dictators. So that's what you're seeing in Russia. Israeli Prime Minister in mediating role meets with Putin in Moscow. I got to say, the first time I heard the story, I couldn't think of many things that are made better by injecting Israel into it, given Israel's own many, many problems. China outlines plan to stabilize its economy in a crucial year for Xi. When Confederate symbols came tumbling down, monuments stood for generations. It took outrage over murder to topple them. They're not all gone, but so many are gone, and that's really nice to see. I wrote in my newsletter today a tweet from someone who said that they got rid of Russian things in America faster than they got rid of Confederates and Confederate statues. 2 political operatives, 2 hired hitmen, and a New Jersey murder mystery. New Jersey's always got fascinating things going on. And here is Put Away the Extra Kibble. Fluffy becomes pudgy in the pandemic too. And that's because these animals aren't getting the exercise they used to or they should be getting. And this is that full story in the New York Times about the Manhattan DA's case against Trump is unraveling. And it was, for those of you who remember, it was a small story on the front page because there's no room. This, I bet, would have been a lead piece in the front page of the New York Times if it weren't for this. Anusha says, I'm a print subscriber and love seeing fellow alumni reporting from around the globe. Thank you, Anusha. And that is an extra special thing that we get to see. And I love reading obituaries. We have had Amy Padnani, obituaries editor of the New York Times, on here. Have you had to write an obituary?
So I did actually write an obituary. It wasn't. I felt I had to, and I pitched it to the Times in 2020 when it was a COVID death of an incredible source of mine. Actually, she was a nun named Georgiana Glos, who devoted her life to taking care of poor people and tragically died of COVID. And so that was thrilling. Thrilling is wrong, but she had such an incredible life. This was a nun who liked to roller skate to work.
I remember seeing that. I remember reading.
Yeah. So yes. So yes, I am a big fan both of the form and also just as a reader, as a consumer. You learn so much with obituaries.
And here's that piece that you wrote, and Neil pulled that up. A nun and activist for the poor dies at 73. Tim Considine, 81, the eldest of TV's My Three Sons. I used to watch My Three Sons, and there he is with Fred McMurray, who was the father on My Three Sons. And one more obit, Gary North, economist of the religious right, dies at 80. Sports section here. This is swept up in a scandal. A college coach goes back to high school. Are you a sports fan?
I cannot, in good conscience, say that I am a sports person, but I did write a piece about my grandmother's obsession with American football for the sports section, which was my one assignment, and it's one of my favorite stories of all time because she was 107 at that point, and she'd become a fan of the Bills, the Buffalo Bills, in her 90s. So this was like the last 20 years of her life, or 17 years. She died at 109. But anyway, that story got a lot of traction because it was my way of exploring my grandmother's life, but using football as the vehicle. She taught me a lot, actually. Yeah, there it is. The Bills fans loved it.
Yeah. And the Bills are good again after being terrible. They were great for a long time and then were terrible, and now they're on the up.
They're back on the up.
So I'm sure your grandma would love to have been around for this run of Josh Allen. And
she's smiling down. I believe it.
Yeah. Folks, we're talking to Andrea Elliott. We're reading the New York Times with her. We're up to the Sunday review of the New York Times, and Where the Party Never Ends, the Disney of aging boomers puts hedonism on full display. Michelle Cottle's story. Interesting choice, right? And with everything that's going on in the world, they go with boomers having too much fun kind of story on the front page. But inside, of course, there are stories. The Russia threat is real. Ukraine's history is being erased. And here is this Cold War will be worse than the last. Well, those of us who lived through the last Cold War know how bad it was. So if this is going to be worse, that is not good in any way. The years of golden years, they're having a lot of parties, eat, drink, and marry, because tomorrow you may need a hip replacement. And so for those of you who think the elderly don't get to have fun, here's what you see. Let's also note that these are rich elderly who get to have this kind of fun, and not all elderly people. And who should be allowed to transition is an opinion. Many governments rely on so-called experts to decide if someone is truly trans. And Judge Jackson could change the court, says Linda Greenhouse, who we've had on the show, the legendary Linda Greenhouse, the Supreme Court correspondent for so many years. If confirmed,
I really love that piece, actually. The line that stood out to me was about halfway through. She writes, "Diversity has many dimensions, perspective among them." You know, it's not just that she's the first Black female to join, potentially. She would also be one of the few who had attended public high school. And that's also another fact that I'll read it to you. Every other member of the court is a graduate of a Catholic high school, all but two, right? Which is kind of stunning. It's a little observed fact at a time when cases concerning public and religious schools and the relationship between the two are prominent in the court's docket. So anyway, I just thought that was just a great.
I haven't read it, so I didn't catch that. But Elena Kagan did go to Hunter College High School, where also Lin-Manuel Miranda and Audra Lorde and others went, where my kids went. So they were very proud of Elena Kagan going to the school. And her brother is or was a teacher there. Wow. And here is the unsigned editorial. Mr. Zelensky's heroic resistance is an example to the world. Other global leaders must rise to meet the challenge, preparing for a future as independent as Russia as possible. Two performers, one hero is Maureen Dowd. And here is the police aren't exactly hurting for cash, says Jamel Boui's piece. The debate over fund and defund misses the point. And how to stop nuclear war from starting is Ross Douthat, who I dedicated an entire newsletter to. I said I used to like to read him, but he is now wrong so often that I don't enjoy reading him anymore. While will Asian Americans desert Democrats? And this is Tom Edsel, my former colleague at Columbia Journalism School. Republicans are using wedge issues to try and pry this key constituency away, and we know they've done an amazing job at prying away Hispanic large percentage of Hispanic voters. All right, we have about 15 minutes left with Andrea. We're going to just quickly look at some of the sections here. Here's the style section, the rise of bigorexia.
Had you heard that word before, Sri?
I've heard that word before, and also this is about boys and how they are affected by social media. I know as a mother of girls, you'll be paying attention to that topic, and as a father of a boy and a girl, I was certainly very concerned about how social media was used and is used all over. And by the way, a shout out to our one of the companies we work with, nonprofits we work with, is called Hip Hop Public Health, and co-founded by a Columbia neurologist named G-Day Williams and the rapper Dougie Fresh. And so I opened the paper, and here's Dougie Fresh on the cover, and they use hip hop to help Black and Brown communities care and take more action around public health issues. And there we are. We are hip hop public health, as you can see. So that's really cool to see that. And Malcolm Kenyatta and Matthew Miller for state representative, the ideal candidate. And weekday I-dos are gaining in popularity. I noticed that. And again, so many things have changed in the time that we are all trying to see how to handle the pandemic and the post-pandemic. Tell me about the cover of the Times Magazine. When you had that cover, we'll show the image from your cover. What did it mean to you to be in the Times Magazine like that?
Oh, it was. I've had a few covers and every single time it feels almost like a hybrid between newspaper reporting and a book. It's like a thing. It's an actual glossy product that you can feel is that you've put an imprint on the cover of it is an incredible feeling. I loved this week's cover photograph.
And of course, it was written before all the changes in suddenly refugees of Ukraine are being accepted and welcomed all over the world, as it should be, but so should have the others. I'm going to do something I've not done in a long time, Andrea. I'm going to actually read the poem that's here. I always say that I love reading the poems, and I say that only the poets or scholars of the poets should read poetry out loud, because they know the poems well. I'm going to read this cold, so I'm going to butcher everything from the poet's name to the rhythm and rhyme here. But We Lived Happily During the War by Ilya Kaminsky. And when they bombed other people's houses, we protested, but not enough. We opposed them, but not enough. I was in my bed. Around my bed, America was falling. Sorry. I was in my bed. Around my bed, America was falling. Invisible house by invisible house by invisible house. I took a chair outside and watched the sun. In the 6th month of a disastrous rain in the house of money, in the street of money, in the city of money, in the country of money, our great country of money, we, forgive us, lived happily during the war. Wow, that is so powerful. I did not know what the poem was, but it was short enough that I thought, Andrea, that I could read it. So powerful. Lena is a Ukrainian-American poet whose work includes Deaf Republic, from which this poem is taken. His honors include a 2018 Guggenheim Fellowship and the selected by Victoria Chang. Very powerful.
It's chilling.
Yeah. And here is the interview is with Chesa Bowden, who believes that criminal justice reform will make us safer. The tough on crime approach has lots of opportunities, and it hasn't worked, he says. So that's interesting. And something you would never have to deal with, but here is at Kwame Anthony Apaya's ethicist column, May I Disinherit My Right-Wing Daughters? Without reading the question, I'm going to put you on the spot. What do you think if somebody has right-wing or left-wing daughters and you disagree with them, what do you think they should do?
Sure. The first thing I would say is I don't agree that I would necessarily not have daughters. My whole approach to parenting is to give my daughters the tools to think critically, to have critical thinking, not teach them what to think, but how to think. And I like diversity of thought. I think it's important to have, debates, to be able to groupthink scares me. So disinheriting someone, I can't imagine it. That's what I would say. I'm very opinionated when it comes to this, but the idea that you wouldn't just engage with somebody who had, people in my family of different political persuasions. I think it's really important to have those conversations.
Sure. May I just say one quick thing here? I'm going to turn on my camera to say it, that yes, diversity of thought is important. Yes, it's crucial to have different perspectives, but I always see that it's people who are progressive who believe that and go out of their way to bring in right-wing conservative thoughts on media outlets and media perspectives, and you never see that in right-wing media or among right-wing folks. So this idea that we need to be, give the other side a chance, which I believed for many, many years. I have now that I'm not a working journalist. I see this gap. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't continue to have other perspectives. I watch Fox, and it drives my family crazy how much Fox I watch, and reading the Wall Street Journal editorial page. But this is something that I do notice. I will say that the Wall Street Journal editorial page, when Tunku Varadarajan was editing it, the op-ed section, he would always have occasionally have folks of a more liberal persuasion there, and it gave that balance. Let's keep going. We're almost out of time here. This is the Lisa Sanders column, Online Art Auctions, How to Design a Bike Lane. Are you a cyclist?
Not really.
Okay. And how about this? A recipe misstep led to perfectly imperfect chocolate thumbprint cookies by Dory Greenspan. So are you...
My kitchen is a cereal recipe upset in real time. I that's all we do is mess up. My children love to bake, and it drives me crazy. And I'm the person who cleans up.
All right. Here's what Rashida Tlaib represents, and by Rosina Ali and Jared Liu. She changed the Israeli-Palestinian debate in Congress by reminding her colleagues of the human stakes. It's a burden she would rather not carry. So I look forward to reading that. And let's keep going here. One more story, The Turning Tide. The legal ordeal of 2 aid workers shows anti-migrant attitudes in Greece This is the cover story. And across Europe have hardened to the point that helpers have become political targets. Just going to go to the back so I can ask somebody from the New York Times about all these puzzles and everything they have. And the New York Times bought, as you know, Wordle. And so are you a Wordle player, a spelling bee player, or the Will Shortz classic?
So I've resisted Wordle. I think that's just the contrarian in me because everyone else is doing it. It's silly. I will eventually come around.
Well, you should know that I have not ever even seen Wordle except in Twitter screen grab. So I don't know it. And I'm the same way. I did not play it on purpose because everybody's playing it. They don't need me to play it as well. I do play Spelling Bee, and I am defeated by it all the time. Last thing we're looking at here.
Sorry, just want to jump in on Wordle. I do play it every day. Just want to point out that it was interesting a few days ago. The solution was rupee, RUPEE, and people were just out of their mind that what they called a foreign word should not have been in Wordle. It's in the dictionary.
Yep.
You know, certain people know it, but it's really interesting in terms of how Wordle has become a touchstone. People who are upset with the Times are blaming the Times for ruining it. It's actually become a huge issue in social media.
Ellen says Wordle's the best, play fun, and we should point out that the gentleman who created it made it because he wanted to have something for the pandemic pastime, a pandemic pastime for his girlfriend, wife or girlfriend, who happens to be Indian American, and Palaksha is her name. And so that means I think she's Gujarati, Neil, just like and rupee is, in fact, all foreign currencies are words in English. And I'm from Kerala, and we like to tell people that the word Malayalam, which is the word for our language, is the longest single word palindrome in English. And Malayalam reads forward and backwards the same way. So folks are learning something here. And should technology companies stay in Russia or leave? Big question. And written by a class of 1997 graduate of Columbia J School, Shira Ovide. So with that, Andrea, I want to come back to you, and we are going to just ask you a little bit more about the book. And we also want to get a pro tip from you. So I'm going to give you a little break. Think about, you already gave us many pro tips for writers who are trying to navigate the book world, or for journalists, anyone you'd like to give a pro tip to. So we'll take that. So I'm going to give you a little break for a couple of minutes. We're going to do some housekeeping, and then we're going to come back to you, Andrea. And folks, that's Andrea Elliott. Stay tuned. She'll also tell us about joyful entitlement. I want to take this opportunity to tell you about next week's fantastic guest, very timely, someone who you will not want to miss, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time on Sunday. Our guest is James Brooke, visiting fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies with a focus on Ukraine, New York Times foreign correspondent for 24 years, worked in Moscow for Bloomberg as bureau chief, VOA as a correspondent, lived and worked in Kiev for 5 years until the fall of 2021. So that's perfect timing. And that's at 8:30 a.m. Sunday next week. Our show will be live, and you can watch the recording of this and all our episodes on our playlists as soon as we are done. Let me thank our fantastic crew once again. Our crew.
I just want to point out, sorry, with the time change, it'll be 12:30 GMT, 6 p.m. IST. Just want to make sure people catch that.
Yes, yep. We have an international audience, and we love them. So you get to sleep in. Well, it doesn't affect you folks, but you'll see it a little later in your day than you would.
A little earlier.
A little earlier. I'm sorry, than you would otherwise. So 12:30 is the GMT and 6 o'clock IST for Indian Standard Time. Our terrific crew, Neil Parekh at Neil Parekh, Paula Kiger at Big Green Pen, Steve Taylor at Steve DeReeve, Julia Weeks at Julia L. Weeks, and Carla Baranakis at Kabara. If you like what you see here, folks, we'd love to work with you. Our company, Digimentors, does these kinds of shows, makes podcasts. We also do virtual events, and and hybrid events. And we also do training and workshops and social and digital consulting. So if you would like any help in any of these, please contact me. You see my email address on the screen, Sri@digimentors.group and Neil@digimentors.group. And a thank you also to Muckrack for being our sponsor. If you'd like to sponsor us, please let us know as well. We would love your support. We've been doing this for 6+ years, and we do newspapers of all kinds with a focus on the New York Times and these fantastic guests. We also want to do a shout out to Carla, who runs this newsletter called The Local Connection. Subscribe for weekly story ideas and pro tips for local reporters. It's at bit.ly/local news tips. And Carla does an amazing job with this, taking national, international stories and helping you understand it at a local level if you want to participate and do stories that affect on a local level. So check out bit.ly/local news tips. And with some great comments coming in, we also want to give a shout out to the show called Women to Follow: Women, Gender, Equality, and War in Ukraine, the week of March 7th. And Monique Kamara will be the guest co-host of Kremlin File podcast and a professor at the University of Siena in Italy. And the host is Rose Horowitz, a Pulitzer-nominated journalist and host and founder. #Women to Follow. Check that out. Special show for Women's History Month. All right, folks, I think we're ready to bring Andrea back. Neil, thank you for a great episode as always. And let's get Andrea on the show.
Absolutely. And Sri, before we have Andrea give the pro tip, I'd like to bring in, just watch a quick video to kind of set the scene and kind of remind us that we actually did talk about her cover story several months ago. Let's check this out real quick.
Another important story. This is my friend and former student Andrea Elliott's story in the New York Times Magazine when Dasani left home. And this is about many aspects of the broken systems of New York City. And we're just going to, so this was Dasani in 2013. And then you saw her in the cover. Now she's 20. So this is her now.
I just wanted to give that little glimpse. Jared Adams was our guest that day. And so Andrea, we've been following the story for quite a while.
Amazing. Thank you.
And Jared is an incredible person himself. He was a convicted felon who is now a defender, a criminal justice lawyer and criminal defense lawyer. And his book is also very, very illuminative of what's going on in the systemic problems we have in this country, and among other things, of course, the systemic racism we have. So, Andrea, tell us about the book. Don't be shy. Pretend that I'm your person from the publishing house telling you not to be modest and to sell that book.
How can she be modest, Sri, with these accolades? I still can't get over it. And then go back to the blurbs, a classic to rank with Orwell.
Yeah.
Just
we also say Obama's one of Obama's best books, 5 best books of
absolutely. Okay, with that setup, Andrea, go ahead, do your best.
I've never felt comfortable, promoting myself. So, I think great journalism tends to accompany a stepping out of yourself and immersing in another world. And so it's an awkward thing to be, but I want people to buy this book, and I can tell you more about the book, or I can give you my pro tip. Which would you like first?
Both. So let's start with the book and then we'll go to the pro tip. So
the book follows nearly a decade in the life of Dasani Coates, who was a homeless 11-year-old when I met her. And through the journey of kind of following her through various systems, government systems, I was able to see her both come of age and also have to confront barriers to advancement that were and continue to be so commonplace for people of color and people in economic disadvantage. And she's an extraordinary human being. I want people to feel invested in her life in the way that I did. And I think that that is the power of human-driven narrative, is that once you are attached to the person you're reading about, in this case, Dasani, her problems, even though they may seem alien to you, just a completely different world, become your problems. And I think that's what this book, I think, hopefully achieves. I see it as an active witness.
Thank you. And thank you for writing that book and telling Dasani's story and telling it so well. We appreciate that. Now let's get the pro tip.
Well, pro tip is, I consider myself, first of all, in the book world, it's not journalist, it's writer. Everyone keeps saying you're a writer, you're a writer. I actually think of myself as a rewriter more than as a writer. The writing part is just the first part of a long process of, just really getting it right. But the other thing I would say is, I wouldn't just call myself a reporter. I think of myself as an immersionist, as somebody who really immerses for long periods of time, gets to know the people well that I'm working on a story about. And one of the things that the tools that became so useful, and I normally wouldn't do this, but it's just, when you said pro tip, it's what came to mind, is I'm not plugging a product. So I will just say it's an audio pen. Well, I'll tell you what it is. It's LiveScribe. It's an audio pen that records audio and at the same time writes. And so you're writing on special paper that timestamps what you're recording. So Dasani called it my spy pen. And it became this wonderful thing where it was always running, and the people I was around knew that the thing was recording, which enabled me to relax in some sense, because I knew that I had this backup and that the quotes would be exact. And at the same time, I could then really immerse. And later on, and something really remarkable happened, I would whip out the notepad and do an asterisk or something. And later on, it's a 2-hour recording, go to the asterisk, and that's exactly the moment where this thing happened. So Dasani would sometimes grab the pen and use it as a microphone and pretend to be a newscaster. And it became this running joke. But I think that that's my pro tip, is to give yourself the tools, whether it's your phone, whether it's audio recording, to help you get it right, while at the same time being able to fully attend to the things you're witnessing in real time.
That's fantastic. And thank you for that tip. I will say I saw there's something similar for Zoom calls called Fathom Note Taker, FATHOM.
Oh.
And I saw someone use that, and I was really impressed. You can do some of the things you're saying, but in a Zoom situation. And of course, it announces itself to the audience so they know that this audio thing is happening. And you can pause it when you can, if you're on a call and you see Fathom being used as a subject or as an expert, you're being interviewed, just say, I want you to pause your recording, and they can pause that recording at that time. So there might be things you're not comfortable saying when it's being recorded. But of course, you should presume that you're always being recorded wherever you are. And that's what that's called, Fathom Note Taker. Okay, folks, that's our show. Thank you so much, Andrea. This was so much fun. I learned a lot, and it's great to be with you again after so many years. Congratulations, says Anusha. Great show. And yes, I'm biased because it features 2 Columbia alumni. I want to show you this comment from Therese. I just bought and downloaded Invisible Child on Audible. Thanks, Andrea, for your commitment to reporting this incredible story. So many other great comments. Jonathan Borstein, great show. Apollo saying, great show. All have a great week ahead. Patricia saying, thanks again for the entire production and guest Andrea for another awesome episode. Ellen says, thank you, fabulous crew show as usual. But Sri, do Wordle. It is a that Rupa does it. And Naomi says, another informative, entertaining show. Kudos all. Colette says, Ms. Elliott, I'll be looking for your book.
Thank you.
And Eve says simply, thank you. And we'll leave it at that. And good luck to you, your family, and to Dasani and her family. And good luck, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you, Neil. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.